And what was really interesting is to look at differences, where some groups are larger or smaller than others. And for this presentation, we're going to be focusing on geographical differences. So you'll be wanting to look at, where is Essex County similar to other regions and where is it different? And that's going to be the focus. As I mentioned, we had almost 3,300 respondents in the survey. That's Jewish households. It's important to know that the survey was conducted finished just about a year ago, from October to December of 2020. I thought by the time we'd be presenting it, COVID would be behind us. Unfortunately, it's not. But it was, much more of an issue back then. So we had not only the health issues, the economic issues, and the political issues that were going on at the time of the survey. So it was kind of an exciting time to be asking questions. And as you understand, as you see the results, it's valuable to keep that context in mind. In a number of cases, we modified our questions to account for the unique context of the survey. I'm going to be going through key findings about the community as a whole, and then I'll turn to look at some of the regional differences. If you've come to any of the other presentations, what I do at the beginning is going to be largely a repeat, but I might say it a little differently this time. So I hope, it bears repeating. So we start with the size of the Greater Metro West Jewish community, and there are a lot of numbers on this slide because there are a lot of ways to think about the size of the community. We start with the number of over 122,000 Jewish individuals, adults and children. They live in almost 57,000 households. Now, not everybody in a Jewish household is Jewish. Jewish household is one where there's at least one Jewish adult, but there may be other people. So in fact, there are 155,000 individuals living in Jewish households. So if you want to think about perhaps the most expansive view of the community, you might be thinking about that number. We have broken down Jewish adults, non-Jewish adults, Jewish children, non-Jewish children. Jewish adults is anyone who says that their religion is Judaism, or they consider themselves Jewish ethnically or culturally. Some of these people, a smaller number, say that they're Jewish and another religion, and they are counted as Jewish for this survey. In addition to saying that they're Jewish, they need to have said that they had at least one Jewish parent, that they were raised Jewish, or they converted to Judaism. So that's a definition, this sort of social science definition of being Jewish. Jewish children, it's a little simpler. We just say if their parents consider themselves Jewish, they are Jewish. And some of those Jewish children also are Jewish and another religion. When we talk about a little bit later in some other presentations, when we talk about participation in education, we always talk about the percent of Jewish children, not of all children, who are in various forms of Jewish education. Thinking about the age distribution of Metro West Jewish adults, you can see here this top row is the breakdown by age, and the middle row in Greater Metro West, the middle row is all US Jews. And what you can see is that Metro West Jews are older than average. So there are, not lot less people who are 18 to 24, the young people. There are more people in the middle ages, in the 45 to 54, 55 to 64. We see much bigger shares than in the total Jewish population. In terms of thinking about families and households, 80% of Jewish adults are married or partnered. And when we refer to couples in our study, we always refer to either marriages or partners living together. Of those Jewish adults, 33% are intermarried. That's quite a bit lower than the average, which is 42% of all US Jews are intermarried. of all married US Jews are intermarried. 30% of households include children, and children are under age 18. And looking at this pie chart, you see that about equal numbers of children are being raised by intermarried parents and in married parents, just about the same. And then another small 8% are being raised by single parents. This is just another view of types of households. And you can see these two shares is about 30% of households including children. These two are couples, a couple living together, and here are single people living alone. This other share, 22%, about 1 in 5, are what we call multi-generational households. Most of those are either young adults living with their parents or people living with elderly parents. It's kind of 2 generations living together of either age with no children, with no minor children. I want to talk a little bit about some measures of Jewish engagement, because of course that's also important to understanding the nature of the community in addition to the demographics. 29% of households are members of a synagogue because there are multiple Jewish adults in those households. We find that 31% of Jewish adults are in synagogue member households. It's just almost the same, but that's the number that we compare to national averages, and it's actually a little bit less than we find from the national numbers are from the Pew study. Even though less than a third of Jewish adults are members of synagogue, more than half of Jewish adults attended a service, a Jewish religious service in the 6 months prior to the study. This is one good example of where we took into account what was going on during COVID, because we included both online and in-person services. And although we typically find that more people attend services than belong to synagogues, so it's not too surprising, this is a good question for further exploration about how much of it was the availability of online services that gave people the opportunity to attend. Another well-known measure of Jewish life is just denominational affiliation. This is just describe yourself. What denomination are you? And you can see this row, this column is Greater Metro West, this column is all US Jews, and you could see there are small differences in the numbers, but the patterns are pretty much the same. Of denominational affiliation, a little bit less Orthodox than average, a little bit more conservative, a little bit less Reformed, but they're close. What I do want to point out to you is the 38% of Jewish adults who have no denomination. On the survey, it asked, what denomination are you? And 2 of the options were secular or culturally Jewish and just Jewish. So about half of that 38% chose one or the other of those. This is a really important category. It's been consistently growing in the American Jewish community, and we see it here as well. And in a few minutes, I'm going to be talking about how to understand that category, and not simply to say that these are unaffiliated or unengaged Jews. The way we're going to talk about that is I'd like to introduce another way of understanding Jewish engagement, that this is something we've developed in our work in studying Jewish communities, but this is a model that's specifically for the Greater Metro West community. This is based on, so the denominational labels is just what are you, and there's a bunch of labels there and you choose one. But when we ask many questions asking about your Jewish behaviors, what kinds of things you do, and not just religious behaviors, but also cultural, communal, and personal behaviors. And we take those behaviors and analyze them statistically to identify what are the patterns of Jewish behaviors. What groups of people do more of, do all of these things, none of these things, or some combination in between. And putting them together, we identified 5 patterns of Jewish behavior. Again, I want to emphasize that these are not labels that are in the survey. This is actually just based or derived from what people do. And then we name them to describe what those patterns really look like, what stands out. The goal of this model is not to evaluate or judge these. It's really just to describe what we see going on in Jewish life in a point in time, and to give the community some new language to understand what Jewish engagement looks like on the ground for a variety of different people. So there's a lot more in the report about all of this, but I'll just touch on some of these groups. So the two groups, the top and the bottom, they're about the same size. The immersed group is the one they do everything. Almost all of them do almost all of the behaviors. Minimally involved, the other end, it's just about the same size, do very little or almost none of the behaviors that we've listed. Then we have another group that's also around the same size that we call the involved group, because they also do a lot of things, but not quite as much or as often as the immersed group do. And those groups are all about 15% of the population. Then the two largest groups are in the middle. They're each about a quarter of the population. And they're quite interesting and different, because the familial group, we name them that because their primary means of engaging in Jewish life is to do what we call the family holidays, which are Hanukkah and Pesach, the holidays that people celebrate at home with their families that don't require them to be connected to an organization or a member of a synagogue. So that's their primary connection to Jewish life. And the other group that we call personal, their primary connection to Jewish life is to do individual activities, things like follow news about Israel, read Jewish books, watch Jewish films. Now they do other things, but they do more of these individual activities than the communal or ritual activities. How does this all compare with denomination? Because it sounds a little bit the same. So what I want to show you, and this is really the value of this model. So you can see if you read across that of Orthodox Jews, nearly all of them, 84%, are in the immersed group, but still 15% are in that personal group, that most of their Jewish life is around their home life and their personal activities, and not so much in the synagogue or in the community. You can see that conservative and reform, this is not surprising, they are in every group, because we know that conservative and reform Jews practice Judaism in many different ways. But what I really want to call your attention to is this group that's no denomination. Remember, I said that that's 38% of Jewish adults. And I wanted you to remember that and think, well, does that mean that they're all just not engaged in Jewish life? Well, in fact, of that group, only a quarter of them are in the minimally involved group. And the remainder, 3/4, are in all of the other Jewish engagement groups, mostly in these middle, familial, and personal groups. But I think that this model really gives us a much richer understanding of what does it mean to be Jewishly engaged for someone who says that they don't identify with a formal Jewish denomination. Okay, I'm gonna just take a drink, and then I'm gonna turn to talking about regional differences. So I'll put the map on the screen. This is a map of Greater Metro West. And you can see that we've divided the region into divided the whole catchment area into 4 regions. We have Union County, Essex County, the eastern, or the majority, but the eastern part of Morris County. And then we have the rest of Morris, Sussex, and a bit of Somerset County. The red dots represent about 25 Jewish households. And then we're going to see a lot of numbers that compare these regions. But what you can see, because we'll focus on Essex County, that Essex County has the largest share of Jewish households, of Jewish adults, and of Jewish children. so you can see the density of red dots in a good part of Essex County. This part over here is Newark. There actually, we did find a handful of Jewish families there, not too many, but you can really see that the Jewish population is concentrated here. The next largest share of Jewish households is in the eastern part of Morris County, and then Union County, and all of this greater Metro West have about the same number of Jewish people in them. Here are the numbers. I won't read them all to you, but I want to make sure that you know that this is available to you, and the details of all the numbers. So there are about over 21,000 Jewish households in Essex County, and almost 60,000 Jewish people. I'm sorry, almost 60,000 people in those households. Just as a percentage, this breaks down a little bit more. You can again see that 38% of Jewish households are in Essex County. I've shown here the density. That means the percent of all households in that region who are Jewish and the percent of all people in that region who are Jewish. And here, Essex is not the highest. Actually, East Morris is the highest in terms of density. But as you well know, I don't have to tell you that, a good part of Essex County is Newark, which doesn't have many Jews at all. It does have a handful. And so if you were to exclude those zip codes, the density in Essex would be a lot higher. It's not something that I did, but that's it's good to keep in mind. Let's look at some of the age differences. And this column is all Jewish adults. And now we see the breakdown by age in each region. And you can see, we'll just concentrate on this, the youngest people. You could see Union by far has the greatest share of 18 to 34-year-olds. Western Metro West also does. This is also, remember, includes a lot of young people living with their parents. Essex has the smallest share of 18 to 34-year-olds. Essex has a large share of people in the middle ages, the 50s to 64 group. That's the biggest age cohort in Essex. In terms of household composition, even though Essex didn't have as many 18 to 34-year-olds, it does have a lot of households with children. More than a third of Essex County Jewish households have minor children. In terms of finances, there's a lot of information in the report about financial well-being of Greater Metro West households. I'll just sort of give you the shorthand of it. We asked income, we asked a lot of measures of economic and well-being and economic challenges, but we did ask one question: just describe your standard of living. There were two categories of not enough money and just getting by. Those two categories we combined together into this category we call financially struggling. That represents 17% of all Jewish households. And you can see that the share in Essex, Union, and Metro West is actually a little higher than average, and it's much less in East Morris, the share of struggling households. On the other end, the share of households who are well off is just about the same in all the regions. I showed you the model of Jewish engagement, and this is just a way to compare what does Jewish engagement look like. That group that was that I described as immersed, that they do everything in Jewish life. Essex County has the largest share of immersed Jews, 19%, almost 1 in 5 in Essex are immersed. It has a pretty small share of minimally involved Jews. East Morris actually has the largest share of minimally involved Jews. And then the rest are distributed across the groups. Sort of a similar pattern with denomination. Here you can see that Essex County, 41% of Jewish adults have no denomination. Union County has the largest share of Orthodox Jews. 10% of Union's Jews are Orthodox. Here we have a synagogue membership. A third of Essex County's Jews are members of a synagogue, and almost half attended a high holiday service in the year before, in 2020. Other ways of being involved in the community. I highlighted these, and it's just an opportunity to talk about something that you'll see in the report. When numbers are shaded, that means that there's a statistically significant difference between the numbers. Basically what that means, and I talked about, these are all population estimates. That means that even if it looks like the numbers are not that different, there actually is, we believe that there's a real difference in the population. Not surprising that Essex and Union have the large share of JCC and Y members. They also have, Essex has the largest share of members of any organization. So that could include things like Hadassah or APAC or any kind of Jewish organizations. These are different across, they're shaded because they're different. But then we asked about, did you attend any or participate in any Jewish sponsored programs in the last year? Or donate to any Jewish organization. And in both of those cases, the share in all the regions was the same. There's no meaningful difference by region. Just wrap up, there's a lot of information in the study about attitudes about being Jewish, feelings. I encourage you to take a look at these. This is from the community report. But this asks a question of, to what extent do you feel connected to any local Jewish community? And the numbers on the top are for all Jewish adults. And then these top two rows are Essex and Union. They're almost identical. About a quarter of Jews feel very connected, a quarter somewhat, a quarter a little, and about a quarter don't feel at all connected. And that's the same for Essex and Union. East Morris and Western Greater Metro West, lower levels of connection, and those about a third of Jewish adults feel no connection to the Jewish community. So that is what I have for you today, and I'm going to stop sharing unless I turn to Ben to ask questions. And thank you, Ben, for putting the link to the report. I really encourage you to look at all of the reports, because there is one report called Geography that has a lot of these breakdowns of numbers by region, but in almost every data point that we report in all the other reports, we break it down and we show differences by region. So you're going to want to take a look at those as well. So thanks,
Janet. Thanks for all of that information, walking through it with us, and explaining how your team went about gathering all of it. We're going to move to some Q&A. So please do some folks have already put some questions in the chat. I've been collecting them. Please feel free to put additional questions now. While you're doing that, a couple of words about the questions. So please feel free to ask questions about anything Janet presented just now, any of her slides, any of the data points she brought up. Also, if you've already had a chance to look in the reports and you have a question from the reports themselves, that's great too. Even better if you're able to say to us, in this report, this particular chart, said this thing, Janet can respond to that. So those sorts of questions are great. As terrific as Janet is at answering questions about this report, as you can see, it's a massive data set that she and her team collected, and we do not expect Janet to have put the entire data set to memory. So please don't ask questions that say to Janet, can you please tell me about this particular aspect of our community off the top of her head? If you have a question from what you presented this evening or from the reports that we can point to, that will be helpful and generative. So Janet, I'm going to shoot the first question I have to you, which was, when you shared in the overall key findings about the synagogue membership, a question came through about if we have comparative data for national in the US of synagogue membership?
We do, and I'm going to share the screen, but I'm just going to show you where it is. While I pull it up, I will point out that most of the comparative data that I've included here comes from the Pew study, which was conducted just around the same time, which is wonderful, makes it really comparable. But not all the questions are asked in the same way. They didn't ask about the same things. It happens synagogue membership is the same. So, but sometimes the way they report things are a little different, and that's why it's sometimes you have to read it a little carefully. Also, to keep in mind that we're really careful about our language, about when are we talking about households and when are we talking about individuals. So sometimes if it looks like numbers are not quite making sense, make sure that you read carefully that it's an apples to apples. But here's a good example. So 29% of households are members of synagogues, and that translates to 31% of Jewish adults. Nationally, it's 35% of Jewish adults. So it's a little bit less, but this is also one of those cases, it's not very much less, and I would say it's comparable. So it's pretty much comparable to the US average.
Thanks, Janet. Another question was about the methodology of the questions related to the folks who self-identified as being of no denomination, and that you broke them down, I believe, into secular and cultural. And the question was, when you did the study, did we offer them in the question a definition of what we mean by secular and cultural, or did the respondents get to just interpret that as they saw fit?
Yeah, so they actually did not get an option of no denomination. They got a list: Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, secular, cultural, or just Jewish. For some reason that, I'll be honest, I don't completely understand. This is the way Jewish community studies often ask this question. And I think it would be a great research project to understand, why do people choose secular, cultural, and some people choose just Jewish, but their behaviors look pretty much the same. And I think it just gives them two ways to describe themselves as more meaningful. So we put those together and say, we refer to those as no specific denomination. Got it.
But to clarify what you just said, Janet, it says secular/cultural, and that's it, without a definition.
Right, secular/cultural is one, and just Jewish is the other one.
And
right,
it's in the respondent's interpretation of how they self-identify. Great, thanks. There was a question about another piece of data that I don't think you presented tonight, but that is in the Older Adults and Health report about a question came in while you were still talking, so I was able to look it up. It's on page 13 of that report. It's the section about services provided by Jewish organizations. And the question asks, if you could maybe share that data and comment on the point, especially about, the questions about whether Jewish organizations were providing their healthcare or special needs services or not.
Let's see, I have the report open. Which table are you looking at? Or page?
So pages 13 and then on to 14.
Okay.
The importance of services.
Importance of receiving services
by Jewish sponsored organizations is on the bottom of 13, and then at the top of 14 is the importance.
Okay. Sure.
So maybe you can share your screen and just walk through that.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so good, and thank you for reading the other reports. That's good. So this question just asked about people who needed a service. This is also just a little plug for this. This is a good example of, you need to really look carefully about what's the denominator, what's this table about. This is of the households that required a service. I don't remember the number, but that's above. And it says that, and in some of these cases, because it's confusing, we show exactly what the wording was of the question that was asked. So this is said So 9% of these households who needed a service received a service from a Jewish organization. 2% sought a service but did not sought a service but from a Jewish organization but did not receive any services. And 89% did not even look to Jewish organizations. They only went to non-Jewish organizations for the services that they needed. So that's what these numbers mean. And bottom line, the vast majority of people are getting their services from non-Jewish organizations. And then this is a good follow-on question. This is, asking the question, would people prefer to get services from Jewish organizations? And I think that this is a very important question for thinking about investment in resources and what services the community provides. So you can see that half of adults say it is not at all important where they get their services. And this is of everyone, regardless of whether or not they need a service. This is just of everyone. Only 6% say that it's very important to get get services from a Jewish organization. Now, this is a place where we break this down by those Jewish engagement groups to see, well, is it the people who are more connected that prefer Jewish provided services? And you can see, yes, indeed, among the immersed group, the interest in Jewish organizations providing service is higher than anyone else, but it's still only 12% of the most engaged Jews say it is very important to get services from a Jewish organization, and a quarter of them say it doesn't matter. So I will say that we ask this question in many communities. We've been asking it for many years. I think this is a fairly consistent finding that people, and I'll just, if I can offer my interpretation, I think that there are people who prefer to get services from Jewish organizations because they feel more comfortable. I think there are also people who feel that they would rather have the anonymity of non-Jewish organizations. And I think most people are really just concerned about the quality and availability of services.
Thanks,
I don't
Janet.
know, we don't have the information about what what service, if there would be different for different services.
Right. If you just go back up to the page above, there's a follow-up question. It reads, when adults claim they sought services only from Jewish organizations, do we know if they knew that Jewish organizations offered the services?
We do not know that.
We don't know that.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. All right, we have another question about methodology, which is about how you found your respondents. How was it determined who from the community participated in the survey?
Right. So, I said we have about 3,300 Jewish households, and the methodology is a bit complicated, but basically we gathered households, and perhaps some of you were invited to do the survey, I don't know, but we gathered households from lists that were provided by many, many local Jewish organizations. And in addition, because obviously we don't only want people who were known to Jewish organizations, we used other methods, some market research. You can purchase lists of people who live in different areas, high density Jewish areas, people who, based on their characteristics, we thought were more likely to be Jewish. And we reached out to them and invited them to take the survey. And it always started with a screener asking if anyone in the household was Jewish. So if anyone in the household was, they were eligible. Now, there is a very complicated statistical method to adjust those responses to stand in for the entire Jewish community. So, I'm not going to take a lot of time to discuss that, but that basically we know that, the different people are going to respond at different rates. So we do some adjustments to make them stand in for the people that they stand in for. And that's why we can match up the real numbers.
Great. Thanks, Janet. Okay. There's a question here about the index of Jewish engagement and the impact of the way the question frames it, I guess, Jewish institutional infrastructure, and whether you think that there's whether the data bears out any relationship between higher prevalence of Jewish institutional infrastructure in certain geographic areas to then lead to an impact on, different breakdowns of that index of Jewish engagement.
Good. And first, I should start off by saying hi to Robert, because we've talked about this from way at the beginning of the study, and I look forward to finally continuing the loop on that. So I would say, it's interesting, the relationship between geography and Jewish engagement. So on the one hand, absolutely, people who live in a place where Jewish institutions and Jewish opportunities are more accessible, it's just easier for them to participate. It is kind of a chicken and egg thing. We don't know, did they move? In some cases, they moved there intentionally because they wanted access to those opportunities. In some cases, it wasn't a priority for them, but they happened to wind up there, and then they send their children to a Jewish preschool because it happens to be the closest great preschool for them, and it's not because it was a high priority that it was Jewish. It could really go the other way as well, that people choose to live in a place where there aren't a lot of Jewish institutions. It could be because very often housing prices are more affordable. I'll just, as an aside, I think Greater Metro West is an unusual community in the sense that it's not like many other US Jewish communities with kind of a there are concentrations of Jewish life, but there isn't like a central core like here in Boston. We have Brookline and Newton, and that's where all the Jewish life is. And then there's everyone else. I think in Greater Metro West, it's much more dispersed. But regardless, people are choosing to live in places that there is no Jewish life. Now, one might argue that the fact that they are engaging in Jewish life at all when it's a little bit harder might even be a sign of higher engagement or the higher motivation. And I'll just to complicate it more is this question of online Jewish life. And what does it mean, when there are things available online and people can participate in a service or a lecture or a concert from the comfort of their home office. I think that's going to really change the meaning of geography. So it's a complicated and important question.
Thanks, Janet. One of the things we've touched on in a number of our conversations about the data is the large portion of the Greater Metro West community in that personal and familial categories of the index of Jewish engagement. Folks who are participating in an array of Jewish activities in their life, choosing to do so, but not generally likely to join institutions. So, just interesting to think about those relationships between the infrastructure, as it was put in this question, but also the different ways that people are experiencing and expressing their Judaism. If there are any more questions, now's the moment to put them in the chat. So having, I think, touched on all the ones that have come in, I want to say thank you to everyone. I want to say thank you to Janet for presenting the information and leading the study. Thanks to all of you for coming and opening up this conversation with us. It's really the beginning of a conversation, the data that we've gathered here. Now we're talking about what does the data mean and what might we all do in response to strengthen our community. At Federation, we're doing that. Our lay leaders and professionals are working in partnership to bring together trends from across the community study reports and to identify priority areas for attention and exploration based on the data. And in the coming weeks and months, we'll be sharing our work out with you in the community. At the same time, we hope you're going to have these conversations in the Jewish communities that you're a part of, in the places in Essex County that you all come from, and think together about what this data means for you as you work to strengthen the Jewish community. If additional questions come up in the data, or if you want to dig into some aspect of the study, we at Federation are ready to be thought partners with you. We would really love that. Please feel free to be in touch with me directly. I'll be glad to field questions, to talk more, to find the right next steps forward, to think about this all together. Being in partnership with all of you, like I said at the top, the goal of and the purpose of the community study is to give all of us this data to strengthen our community, and we really are committed to doing that with you. So hoping this is the beginning of an ongoing dialogue, and again, expressing gratitude for everyone for joining us and wishing everyone a good evening. Thanks so much.